Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic Hypersonic.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here to do a breakdown and review of Rebel Moon Part 2, The Scargiver, which was just released today on Netflix. It is, of course, the sequel to Rebel Moon, Child of Fire. This film begins after the events of the first film, of course, and we find Cora, Gunnar, General Titus, Nemesis, Milius, and Tarak having returned to Velt after defeating Admiral Atticus Noble at the end of the previous film, or so they thought. Jimmy the robot, meanwhile, has been wandering the moon, experiencing all the beauty it has to offer as he grapples with what he's become after defying his programming and slaying the Imperial officers in Part 1. Our team of good guys discovers, thanks to the Imperium turncoat Aris, that Admiral Noble and his ship, the King's Gaze, will return to Veld in 5 days, placing the villagers and their grain back in the crosshairs of the Imperium, despite Noble supposedly having died. Of course, we know that he didn't now, because following his confrontation with Cora and the other revolutionaries in Part 1, where he seemingly fell to his death, Imperium soldiers took his barely alive body to one of their cryo chambers, which not only treated his injuries, but also made him stronger, and of course, brought him back to life. The thing is, he still has one scar that the chambers couldn't get rid of. It's a scar on his chest, and it's a reminder of his fight with Cora that he wears with pride. He swears he's going to have his revenge on the Scargiver, what he now calls her because of the scar that she left upon him. So now we get a little bit of a flashback. We know from the previous movie that for generations, the Imperium expanded across the galaxy using its strength and powerful technology to colonize dozens of worlds. We also know that Princess Issa, who had supernatural healing abilities, inspired the Motherworld's king to make the Imperium more peaceful and benevolent. So in this film, in the flashback part, we see the actual killing of the king. The king and the royal family arrived to christen the final dreadnought, declaring it a ship of peace. But the elites, comfortable with the status quo, conspire to assassinate them and install the ruthless regent Belisarius to, I guess, the throne to continue the Imperium's unrelenting expansion. And as such, Belisarius, who remember is also Cora's adoptive father, assassinates the king and queen, or rather his men do, and then he orders Cora to shoot the princess, which she does. But he then turns on her and makes her complicit in the assassinations, blaming it all on her, forcing her to flee. And then with the king dead, Belisarius and his co-conspirators in the Senate took control of the Imperium and just continued its conquests across space. But our good guys, along with the villagers, know that they have to come up with a plan if they're going to defend Velt from the Imperium. So what they do is they figure that if the Imperium is there to steal the grain, they'll use it to shield themselves from bombardment from orbit. They harvest all the wheat, mill it, and place all the flour that it produced around their homes and other structures, ensuring destruction of one of them would mean destruction of the grain as well. This, of course, meant that the Imperium soldiers would have to come to the surface, where they would have a chance to fight on their own terms, sort of. This all reminds me of another movie I saw where the villagers have to fend off a really awful bad guy. Anyway, before the fight begins, Noble offers Cora a chance to spare the village in exchange for herself and the grain, enough to feed the men on their way back to the Motherworld anyway. Deciding that her life isn't worth more than the rest, Cora gestures to her team that she will not allow anyone to die for her. But seconds before she turns herself over to the Imperium in certain death, Gunnar steals her pistol and uses it to signal the start of the revolt, and the villagers attack the Imperium soldiers. Cora and Gunnar run for the dropship that's been disguised as a casualty of the battle and use it to infiltrate the King's Gaze. This is Cora's ship that she came to the planet on before. Once aboard, Cora and Gunnar plant several explosives on the ship's core that will ground it for good. General Titus leads the villagers against the Imperium forces, using his spider holes, in which they hide before springing up to surprise the invading soldiers. As the battle rages in the village below, Cora and Gunnar cut through the soldiers on the dreadnought after planting the explosives in the core. In their final face-off, Admiral Noble confronts Cora and Gunnar, and they engage in a pitched hand-to-hand battle while the King's Gaze falls from the sky, disabled by the bombs. Cora eventually makes good on her promise to kill Noble, cutting off his head and making the King's Gaze his tomb. So hopefully that time he's dead. I mean, come back from that, dude. Anyway, As the ship was crashing down, a bunch of drop ships were launched with, more Imperium soldiers, and it wasn't clear how the villagers were going to fend them off, but just at the last moment, the fierce group of intergalactic insurgents from the first movie, led by Devra Bloodaxe, returned to save the day, destroying the last remaining Imperium dropships and crushing their advance once and for all. Unfortunately, Gunnar did not survive the fight. He dies in Korra's arms right before the end. In the final moments, while everyone is mourning the dead, we learn a shocking truth that wasn't all that shocking, actually. Princess Issa, believed to have been killed by Korra, is still alive, which I've thought from the beginning of the first movie, she's not dead. That's something that's going to come somewhere along the line in this story. We're going to learn that she didn't die, and that's how the tide is really going to turn, and we're going to get a happy ending. It remains to be seen whether or not I'm correct, because of course we have to watch part 3 before we'll know how the whole saga ends, but that's what I've been thinking since the beginning, that she's not dead, and it is confirmed just at the end of this film that that's the case, and everyone vows they're going to find her and fight. So that was a very basic breakdown of the plot of Rebel Moon Part 2. So what did I think of it? Well, I liked it better than I liked the first one. There is stuff in it that I thought could have been cut. They gave us a little bit of backstory on a couple of the main, characters fighting in Korra's group, and I didn't think they really added that much to the story, these backstories. So I kept thinking, okay, that's cool. When are they going to get to the fight? When are they going to get to the crux of the film? When are they going to get to the confrontation? And so I was a little ho-hum about that part. I wouldn't say that I ever felt the movie dragged, but I was like, okay, why they would, we know what's going to happen. There's going to be a confrontation. Let's get to it. And the movie is over 2 hours long, so I think they could have cut that stuff and it still would have come in at a respectable feature film length. But like I said, it wasn't bad and it didn't make the film drag. I just kept thinking, this is not the part that I want to see. But once the battle part kicks in, the confrontation kicks in, I thought it was very, very strong. It's nothing we haven't seen before in different stories, but I just thought it was very well done. I mean, it looked gorgeous. It was very action packed, and there were a lot of different, phases of the battle that were going on at the same time. And I thought they did a good job of balancing that. The final confrontation between Korra and the Admiral is crazy because the ship is going down, and so it's on an angle, and they're fighting while they're sliding along the floor, and they've got like laser swords, which in this are really cool because every time you swing them, there's like a trail of like smoke, I guess. It's giving off like smoke when you swing it. It looks really cool. So I really liked that. And, the special effects are just insane, of course. So it looked great. And, there's a whole part with Anthony Hopkins' character, Jimmy the Robot, who Korra calls James. And he comes up, towards the end and comes in the clutch. And so that's a pretty cool scene as well. There were a couple of things, even in the battle part, though, that were a little hard to swallow. Like at one point, Korra comes out of an elevator swinging from sort of the roof of it and kicks like a lead soldier, and then he kind of falls backwards into a bunch of the other soldiers, and they all kind of go blah, 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 and they fall down. And I was like, yeah, she didn't hit him with that much force. I'm not buying that. And then while she's like fighting them hand to hand, this guy has one of those laser swords, and he's just kind of standing there. And it was like one of those video games where the AI kind of lets you fight the bad guys one by one when they should be all attacking you at once. So I was like, why is he just standing there? But, it only lasts for a second. It doesn't really make the film bad in any way. It just takes you out of it for a second and you go, I don't think so. There was another part too where, like I said, they infiltrate the ship. When it was happening, I was like, yeah, there's no way they would have fallen for that. And I found that part not believable. But again, it's just one of those things you got to kind of roll with it if the story's going to play out. And so I did. And I think what's there in terms of the action is very strong. And, the visuals are very strong. So it's not hard to overlook those little things. They don't really take away from the overall experience of the film. So I liked it. I liked it better than part 1. And I'm looking forward to part 3. And that's really all there is to say. So I'm going to get out of here. I will, of course, be here again when part 3 comes out to do a breakdown and review. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.